Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. We're going to talk about money. So do you have a lot of money? Our government wants you to send them more. They're spending like crazy, and they're wondering how they're going to pay all the bills. But that's never a problem for politicians, especially if they spend too much. They always know they can print some. And it isn't some anymore, it's just print almost everything. So the big issue this past week has been the appropriation bills, the infrastructure bill. It was 1.2 trillion. It was just a small little bill there because they're waiting for the big one coming next week. It'll be the $3.5 trillion that they have to pass. But there was a lot of talk about the infrastructure bill because, they're usually very easy to pass, and it turned out really not that difficult. It must have been a pretty darn good bill. 19 senators joined the Democrats, to get this bill passed. It was 69-30. So I would say that there's a lot of bipartisanship there. And they broke it down, the 1.2 down, there was $550 billion was infrastructure. So it wasn't all for infrastructure, but it was argued that it was. But even the $550 billion, believe me, there's a lot of stuff in there that is not absolutely important for the infrastructure to keep from falling apart, because that won't be enough. Believe me, it doesn't work that way. It's amazing how much effort they put into a bill like this, and especially on something like infrastructure. They pass these bills. Sometimes it takes years and years to get things done. They first get the authorization for the project, and then they get the appropriations for it, and then they lay the plans. Then the environmentalists come in, and lo and behold, the cost goes up. The cost goes up because of the bureaucracy, but the cost goes up because of inflation. And then all of a sudden, even the 550, if they made an attempt to keep within their budget, they never do, because there's a plan B for this. If they run out of the cash that is technically authorized, they'll find a way. There'll be an emergency, and they will finally get the money somehow. And of course, we should be reassured there's a limit on the budget debt. They can't go without the Congress passing an increase in the budget debt. And yet it's always a political thing going on, because the end party is responsible for doing it, so it becomes a political battle. But even that becomes a little bit farcical, because they just ignore it. They ignore it. And there's a lot of ways for the Congress to get around any of that. So if you have an economic emergency, financial emergency, or if you have a war going on, believe me, they can get the money to wherever they need, because they have the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve doesn't get audited, and they can deal with trillions of dollars. So there's no real control on it. But we go through these budgetary process. There's a political stunt in it, and they pretend they're doing nothing but necessary spending, and there's a lot of politicking going on. So Chris, tell us how we should go ahead and solve this problem. What kind of a message should we send to the American people and send to the U.S. Congress so they buckle up?
I wish I had good news, Dr. Paul, but I don't. I'll tell you, I think 1,000 years from now, they will be writing about the recklessness of the U.S. government back, in our age and even before us. And it's a free-for-all, whether you're talking about $6 trillion for wars, wasteful wars, $28 trillion in debt, 200+ trillion in future promises that are made to people, and add infrastructure to the pile. So it's just another huge boondoggle. And the real problem of this is we have no choice. And I'd like to draw an analogy. Imagine going into a pizza shop, and you walk in, the guy tells you, hey, you want one slice? That'll be $1,000. Well, you'll be out of that pizza shop before he's finished his sentence. And that's the beauty of free markets and freedom and voluntarism, the ability to say no. But what if you have no choice? What if you walk in there and he says, listen, I'm the guy. I make your pizza. You must pay me $1,000 for it. You have no choice. And isn't that the position we're in? We have no choice but to pay for these wars, for this infrastructure, because we have absolutely no say. Our votes don't let us keep our money and prohibit them from taking it from us. So with this type of arrangement, this warped arrangement, what types of people do you think will be attracted to this, to be able to take from people legally? And they have nothing to say about it. You'll have people that want something for nothing. You'll have authoritarians, and that's what we see. We have front row seats to the ugliness of this system, and it's someday it'll go bankrupt, but until then, we'll keep reporting on it.
Yeah, and that's the practical matters of it and how the political system works, and especially when you have fiat money and deficits really don't matter to them. But the bottom line for all that is what is accepted by the people for the role of government? What should it be? Unfortunately, I would say that 90-some% of the American people are probably enthusiastic about the definition of the role of our government, because we are a free government and we have to be equitable. And that is that the government is responsible for the welfareism. Have a safety net for everybody. You already mentioned the military spending. Yes, we have to have preparations for welfare and defending our country. Of course, the defense of our country is usually couched in terms of defending our country, and yet it's really maintaining our empire. So the role of government, if we don't address that, there's going to be a demand to spend this money. And once you get rid of all the restraints, like getting rid of the gold standard, getting rid of really limitation by debt, and solving the problem and having people get some conservatives in Congress to help them get the budget balance. And this is the reason why, Chris, your pessimism about years from now they'll still be doing this. As long as you have the politicians, as long as you have a government. Our founders made a very sincere attempt to try to change it, and in many ways they made a change. But even back then, there were predictions that it probably wouldn't last, because there will be this temptation to abuse the restraints on government, and there should be restraints on the government. That should be the purpose. But right now, there's no signs that is likely to happen. And the big thing that does happen is finally a country gets into bankruptcy. So we'll be seeing that in the not too distant future on what will come out of the ultimate bankruptcy, because we're partially involved in that bankruptcy now. But one thing that has been going on in this little political battle is they talk about inflation, and everybody should be. People are starting to wake up that their costs are going up significantly, and that was the policy of the Federal Reserve. For years and years, they were begging and pleading that their policy would make the inflation, that is the destruction of the money, 2% every year, which was a farce. It was already doing that and is doing a lot more. But they had a policy of, instead of preserving the purchasing power of the dollar and having it, equivalent to gold in some way to restrain government and the spending, they were saying, no, we have to have the inflation because it's good for the economy. But because there's recognition that prices are going up more rapidly than in not too distant past, it becomes a political thing, because the Republicans right now, since this past year, it's not even a whole year that Biden's been there, but prices have perked up. And for the reason that they're printing too much money, and they have been. So it's not exactly accurate to say, partisan-wise, it's Biden's fault. He created all the inflation. Yes, he and his buddies are big contributing factors, but literally they haven't done this. This has been going on. The prices that go up now are probably reflecting the creation of new money, maybe ever since QE started, maybe for the past 10 years, because that works its way into the system. And so Republicans and Democrats, Republican presidents and Democrat presidents and Congresses, because they accept this notion of the role of government should be to take care of the welfare and warfare problems, and that is deficits don't matter, and it's all part of Keynesianism. So, but it's not a legitimate argument to say that Biden is the charge of inflation, but he is not going to help us either. The big debate of would he spend more or less than the Republicans, and that's up for debate, because the Republicans speak a pretty good game, but they're really not very good at being fiscal conservatives. And that's why we should be cautious in how we describe what's going on and how important these budgets are. They are. But we have to be realistic in understanding what's going on and what are the odds of getting a few more members of Congress that might be lean toward conservative and cutting spending. Is that going to be something that we can expect to happen, or is that not going to happen and we better make some other plans? And we cannot do this without dealing with the subject of what is the proper role for government in a free society.
Absolutely, Dr. Paul. And, since we're talking about infrastructure, the first thing people should think about in our day when they hear infrastructure is boondoggles. And our friend David Stockman has written extensively on it in detail on the boondoggles of infrastructure. But I even have anecdotal evidence. There's a major highway not too far from me, and it has been under construction, I would say, for decades. And my parents, who were recently visiting, we were on that highway, and I told my dad, I said, Dad, they've been working on this it seems like decades. And he said, they've been working on this since he was a kid. So it's my entire life, this highway has been under construction. And what a gravy train I'm sure it has been for people. And, if I was to tell our audience, we're going to spend trillions of dollars on infrastructure, and I'll tell you, you're not even going to recognize this country once we're done. You know what you can do with trillions of dollars? You'll be amazed at how the infrastructure will be totally brand new and beautiful. Now, would you believe me? I hope not, because you shouldn't believe me if I said that, because that's not how it works. Government is the best customer for corporations. And that's why there's so many corporations that are tied to government. It's taxpayer money that you're after, not customer money, not customer service. You're working that politician, that taxpayer. And at the same time, that politician is working you. He's looking to hand out other people's money in order to win the next election. So when you think of infrastructure, think big time boondoggles.
Very good. The thing that we have to be concerned about is can we reverse it or stall it or slow it up or not? And that's where I'm very, very much in doubt that that'll happen. I've often said that all spending is a tax, because if they spend it, the spending is a big deal and the deficit is a big deal, and they may be able to hide it and skirt around it and all these things. But when the money is spent, it is a tax. It'll either be paid by a direct tax and have an income tax, which isn't enough under today's circumstances, but a little bit of it will be paid that way. The others will be paid by borrowing money, borrowing for the from the government and the future generations, and there's a lot of that. So that is a tax because it will be paid by the people. Maybe not tomorrow, but the next day it has to be paid for. But then there's the other way that the debt is paid for, and that's through the Federal Reserve. If there's a lot of debt out there and there's treasury bills issued, which is $120 billion every month, and they're going to increase it some because it's way out of control, but there are no restraints on the Federal Reserve, to print. So that is in a way a tax, and it comes to the people through an inflation tax, and that is what's going on right now. People are getting upset with the prices going up, and they shouldn't say, well, the prices are going up, I need more money in my in my unemployment check. No, there's not a shortage of money. There's too much money doing the wrong thing, but the people and business people notoriously, through all the booms and busts and the recessions, they always say we're short money, we're short money. And of course, that is the problem because the money's losing value and prices are going up. And that will not, solve the problem. And this month's statistic, the CPI and the PPI, it's far surpassed the 2%. It's probably going up closer to 12%, according to some of the libertarian economists. It's very, very high. And so the people that might give us a better assessment of that are the people who still buy their groceries at the store or just common things. And then what people have to watch for is this core inflation rate. You know, the other day they reported the CPI, but they reported just the core rate, and they don't report food and energy. And they exclude that, and so it doesn't look quite so bad. But you can't fool the housewife that has to go and do shopping. You can't fool the people when they run out of money at the middle of the month instead of the end of the month because of high prices. And whether it's gasoline or whatever, just by fudging the figures and not including it in one of these statistics doesn't really help anybody. It just encourages people to be more distrustful of what the government tells us, which is pretty easy to do these days, especially in the age of COVID. There's a lot of reasons that people they do this. They distrust the government and the reporting. But ultimately, people can't be fooled into believing that big spending, deficits, and shenanigans and bipartisanship is going to solve the problem. And I just am astounded at that vote, 69-30, and it's supposed to be 50-50, Republican and Democrat. So they had to have 19 senators going over. And say, that is different. That's infrastructure. Yeah, we know. Probably a very small percentage of that will go to infrastructure, and then by the time, like I mentioned, by the time they get around to building, and inflation and delays and bureaucracy is going to make some of those projects go much, much higher. So it's a game they play, but ultimately the game ends. The game ends, and it quits working when the dollar quits functioning in a practical manner. And yes, we can live with 5, 10, 15% price inflation, and the people will get angry and aggravated, but eventually the whole system quits working because people, no matter what the government tells us, that rampant price inflation, when it's 5%, it can go to 10, and when it's 10, it can go to 20. And then if a country doesn't solve its problem and put in some restraints, then we end up with runaway inflation, which obviously would be very, very dangerous.
Right, Dr. Paul. Let's hope that's avoidable. I don't know, but we'll see. I'm going to finish up, though, by saying, the infrastructure narrative fits all the other narratives, the craziness that surround us. Everything besides infrastructure is infrastructure. A hug is infrastructure. Unicorns are infrastructure. Really? Well, how much are these hugs and unicorns going to cost? Basically, they're saying, we're going to take your money, and it doesn't matter what excuse we give you. And it fits with the vaccine propaganda we had yesterday on the show. We pointed out Lindsey Graham, who, he took the vaccine, he got COVID, and he says you should still take the vaccine. And I saw probably the most extreme headline today, that sadly a person who took the vaccine passed away from COVID. And the headline was, well, he would have been, it's still good that he got the vaccine. I mean, the person passed away. It's not good. So it's insanity. And this incompetence, this stupidity, is it on purpose? Who knows? But what is on purpose is the authoritarian mentality is they want no limits. They want no legalities, no constitutions. What they say is the truth. And that's it. And actual truth is a nuisance. And if you try to bring it up and bring up facts, you're just, they'll call you some name. They want to say something. We saw this with COVID. They say something today, it's the truth. They say the opposite the next day, it's the truth. And that's the authoritarian mindset. They are the truth. And, we preach the exact opposite and hope to bring the actual truth, because that will get us out of this mess eventually. Sticking with the real truth will turn this whole thing around.
I think you're right on that one, and that's what we work at constantly. I want to close today with talking about a definition. And the definition is that of bipartisanship, the necessity for bipartisanship. And I think bipartisanship is not a good idea if the bipartisanship gets together to always increase spending. So it doesn't make any sense. And a lot of people like, in politics you should have moderation. If you have a progressive that believes in a certain subject, which they believe and hold dearly, and then you have a conservative, have something on the conservative side, but they're nice and decent people, and they talk, and they get together, and they say, well, okay, we'll give up this and give up this, and we'll come together. I think it's not the way to do it. You don't get anywhere if the good people who have strong beliefs give up what they believe in. Besides, you can. I think it's an advantage to find good progressives because they can agree with libertarian ideas. The same way with conservatives, they can agree with libertarian ideas. And I think this brings people together with increasing a person's liberty at the same time restraining government. But this bipartisanship, that vote that I keep talking about here, it just doesn't make any sense that we think that's going to help us get out of this trouble by people selling out what they believe in. These 19 senators that does that mean that they're not fiscal conservatives? And what is their reasoning for this? I think anybody listening to the program gets motivated. They ought to look it up and find out if their senator, which way their senator voted, especially if they claim they're a conservative. So that is a real problem. But it doesn't change. Ultimately, it's back to this whole idea of what the role of government ought to be. And it's a lot of discussion has gone on throughout history what the government should be and what they can do. And we've certainly had a lot of that discussion in our early history, but it's changed a whole lot because right now the role of our government is to take care of people from cradle to grave, police the world empire, and make people perfectly safe, take care of every ill, and take care of every little problem they have to make sure they're safe, even if you have to sacrifice liberty. That's a bad course to be on, and that's how we sold out on the principle of sound money, which if you have sound money, you restrict all this because the Fed can't print a sound currency like gold or silver. And if you're restrained, then all of a sudden you can't run up these deficits. You have to work and save money and get together and invest. But this whole thing, because on the short run, it looks great. A lot of people are making a lot of money. The problem is the money they're making is maldistributed. Some are getting a lot more than others. Others are getting all the inflation and the problem. So it's a bad system, even though you can point out there's a lot of people who are making a lot of money. But to run a country or plan in a country with talk but no action, I think if you want limited government, and it's difficult to do it, but the founders gave us a guide, and it's in the Constitution. It's far from perfect, but at least could get us going in the right direction. But the people have to endorse the notion that limited government is good, and that we cannot depend on the government for our safety and security, and we should not be interfering with the people around the world and forcing our ways on others, because that's a big thing that participates in our bankruptcy. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.